to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak with Carolyn Williams about her book, Meals That Heal, and how to prevent future diseases, as well as heal or improve most conditions by making a few simple changes to your diet. Carolyn Williams is a mom, registered dietitian, James Beard award-winning author, cookbook author, and podcast host, breaking nutrition down into bite-sized, real-life approach. Her best-selling cookbook, Meals That Heal, is the first anti-inflammatory book written by a James Beard award-winning registered dietitian, and the first multi-purpose book on the market for those who want to make changes before they have a condition. With more than 100 quick and tasty recipes featuring natural, healthy ingredients that have a research-backed ability to cool inflammation, balance gut health, and detox the body. Meals That Heal will show you how to prevent future diseases, as well as how to heal or improve most conditions by just making a few simple changes to your diet. Now, there's nothing simple about Carolyn Williams. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for that amazing intro. I've so been looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise, this is fun because I think a lot of people really do need that time to heal. So Meals That Heal, I think, brings up the best part of what we're trying to do in our lives. Find peace, find happiness, find joy back again. And there's nothing in my family's life that's more joyful than the kitchen. Everybody gathers, everybody talks. That's where the conversations and everything come to life. So what I want to ask you is, as you started to think about this whole Meals That Heal, how did you actually come up, first off, with the title, and then what brought you to wanting to actually make this book become a reality?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say that it was just this fabulous idea that I had for Meals That Heal, but I believe it was originally something my editor suggested. So I have to give her credit. I just pitched an anti-inflammatory, quick and easy cookbook. And then she suggested that, and I was like, well, surely that's taken. It's such a great, it just comes out nicely, Meals That Heal. And I thought, there's no way we're not going to be able to use this, because the publishing company was running it through trademarks and stuff, and it was available. I just lucked out, I feel like, with getting a great title and having a great creative editor. But I have to tell you, to be completely honest, inflammation was not even on my radar 5 years ago. In fact, if you had told me that I would write a cookbook on inflammation, I would have said no way. I mean, I knew I had some cookbooks with me. I started out in cookbook publishing as one of my first jobs. So I knew that. I knew the methods for doing it, and it's kind of just ingrained in me. And I knew I probably had another cookbook or two in me. But if you said inflammation, I would have said no way. And then I probably would have said that will never sell.
Oh, you're so right, Carolyn. You know that the interesting part is the better educated our consumers, the more they start to recognize how important the food that they eat actually changes the way they feel. So you're dead on that one.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of tell you how I got hooked on inflammation, or why I just felt so, inclined to write a cookbook, and then I had to do it, and I had to make it family friendly. It really goes back to an article that I wrote on Alzheimer's for Cooking Light magazine back when it was still being published. And this article is actually what I ended up winning a James Beard award for. But they asked me to come in. I had no idea, like this was like a big feature article of the year, but they wanted me to do kind of a deep dive into the foods that there was some research to suggest may actually ease or slow Alzheimer's, or even prevent it. And then do some recipes. And it was a 2-part piece. So the first part was a chef who was actually living with Alzheimer's and kind of how she had adjusted her life, as including what she ate and that kind of thing. And then I was kind of the research and the food part after that. And to be honest, I had not looked at research in regards to nutrition and brain health really much at all at that point. Now, I mean, it's totally my focus area, but back then, I hadn't looked at it. So I dug into the research, because I will say I write a lot of articles, more digital now these days. And there's always kind of trolls or people who have comments or want to second guess or tell you you're not right. And so the one way that I kind of combat that personally or internally is I just have to dig full force into the research and absorb the knowledge and then come back up to the surface so I can write it and explain it to people in ways that they can relate to. And so that I'm confident in my knowledge. And, I feel 100% confident in what I'm putting out. So that's kind of what I did with Alzheimer's. And I learned about its development and the amyloid plaques and buildup and that kind of thing. But one thing that was mentioned was inflammation. Inflammation in the brain seemed to enhance the progression of Alzheimer's, and inflammation was a key player, kind of like just a motor running in the background almost, if you will. So again, I had no idea this was their feature article. I had no idea it was being submitted for an award. I was actually out of the country for spring break with my kids and had no cell service and got back I think we flew into Florida, and I had all these texts popping up, and I was like, what? And there was like, congrats. And I was like, what is this? And I had no idea it was being nominated. And so it got narrowed down to 4. And this article that I wrote was one of them. And then the rest is history. And I wish I could say that's what got me hooked on inflammation, but it was not. What happened next is probably what we all do. I just, I had to have other writing assignments come my way, on a variety of things that had some kind of nutrition connection, autoimmune conditions. I'm sure there were some on weight loss, intermittent fasting, diabetes, heart disease, variety of conditions that I, at that time, looked at very, very differently, and had different approaches to when it came to eating. So fast forward 6 to 9 months later, when I finally sat down and took like a break from work and took a vacation, I was sitting on the beach. I can vividly remember it. And it was just kind of an aha moment. And I remember just kind of thinking back through what I'd written and kind of maybe some future ideas. All of a sudden, it just hit me, inflammation, when I've been doing all this research on all these topics that seem very different to me, the one thing that connected them all is inflammation. Low-grade chronic inflammation was a key player in every single one of them. And I started to realize we don't necessarily need a heart-healthy diet, a high-fiber diet, those different types of diets. We need an anti-inflammatory diet. And then I realized, this isn't just for when you start to get aches and pains or get sick. This is something like my kids could benefit from. And I started to wonder, what if I could really incorporate more anti-inflammatory eating practices into my own family? Like what kind of difference might that make on their health in 30 or 40 years? So that's really kind of where I was like, oh my gosh. But then I sat back and I was like, I have no idea how to do it. I'm overwhelmed by the thought of it. But I love a challenge. And so that's when I thought, okay, I got to figure this out. And then I'm going to share it with other people. So that's how the book actually came about.
Carolyn, it's really interesting because you have so many roles that you play in your life, from mom to writer to dietitian, really looking at the scale of it. And as we both know, it might be good for you, but they won't eat it, right? And that's one of the lovely parts about diving into your book and looking at, they're tasty. It has to be something that people are going to eat. Otherwise, it's all for naught. And when you build out that look at inflammation and read what it does to our body, it makes you stop and think. And you really didn't just make a cookbook, you made an important and really exciting way to look at how food nourishes our entire body, including our brain, including our heart, our muscles, our ligaments, our tendons. And it starts from the baby in the crib all the way up to our golden years. And your book does cover a lot of great recipes, but there's so much more extras in the book. Tell us a little more about what those extras in your book are all about.
Yeah, I really felt strongly that I needed to introduce the concept of chronic inflammation to people. And I needed to do it in a very, very approachable way. But I felt it was important to do this. Well, for one, no one likes to be told you need to eat this way and not being given a reason. But I really felt it was important for people to see the connection to their overall health status, to wellness, to all these potential disease risks, to any current diseases that they had now, because it affects everybody. So I really felt it was important to just break it down super simple. And I'm a very visual person. So, I give lots of references. I like use the fire reference kind of for how inflammation builds in the body. So I would really just kind of read all this heavy research and then just have to synthesize it and kind of visualize it in my head because I knew I had to make it. People are busy, that very rarely, or you've got to have something quick and something tangible to grab their attention because we're so busy. We only have a certain amount of time to allot to things. So if you want them to read it, it's got to relate to them and be quick and simplified. So I really felt, in the first part of the book, I talk about inflammation. I talk about how it develops, good and bad inflammation. I talk about what some known triggers of inflammation are. And then I really get into what we can do with the diet. What foods are anti-inflammatory? What foods do we need to maybe think about eating less of? Touch on gut health, because gut health is so connected to overall health, largely through inflammation.
That's one of the pieces when we start talking about gut health and also, inflammation in and of itself is the foods that can really flare things up. And the holidays can make it better for celebration and happiness and then put you in a tailspin because there's all sorts of sugar and alcohol and things that really do detrimentally impact you on that scale. But what are some of the things that you've noted in your research that may not be at the top of the list, like sugar and alcohol, that considering possible reduction or looking at it in a way that you see this as something that we respect? Because I know for myself, I definitely see the sugar as my anti-inflammatory. If I'm going to work out the next day, I don't feel like on task. If I've sat down with some, for example, Halloween candy, not so much of a good day the next day, more lethargy, fatigue, possibly headaches, just achy in general. Can you give us a couple of less known inflammatory foods that maybe the listener today may not have thought of?
Yeah. And I love that you're making the connection between just small things like sugar and just not feeling quite like yourself, because that's really kind of how inflammation can start to develop if we don't, approach it. So one of the things that's playing a big role is our omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Mm-hmm. We are consuming such high amounts of omega-6 fatty acids. Now, all your fats and oils consist of unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. Some of those unsaturated ones are omega-6, some may be omega-3, some may be other omegas. And they get classified based on, like, they're called like a polyunsaturated or monounsaturated based on what predominantly is in them. And we tend to get a large amount of monounsaturated fatty acids, or what fats and oils that are predominantly monounsaturated, and a lot that are composed of omega-6 fatty acids. We get a huge amount because they're in your vegetable oils, your seed oils, your basic oils that we've used in the past for cooking. And so we're getting a high amount of those because they're used in processed foods and most salad dressings and, just everything. But at the same time, we're not getting near enough omega-3 fatty acids, those good fatty acids that we so need for really all aspects of health, brain health, heart health, everything. And those are the ones found like in fatty fish. In those type of places. So the ratio is really skewed, and research suggests that is one that is, increasing or aggravating inflammation in a lot of people. Excesses of anything, an excess amount of carbohydrates or calories on an ongoing basis, an excess of caffeine, an excess of alcohol. This does not mean that you can't have those at all. And actually, alcohol can be somewhat anti-inflammatory to a certain point. But once you pass that point, you negate all those benefits and it starts to become inflammatory. So an excess of really anything, and I hesitate to say it, but moderation is really the key. I know people get sick of dietitians saying that, but
I do understand.
Yeah.
Because people want to take out, they want to restrict, they want to go full bore on, I'm going to be into this one diet, and 5 days later they've fallen off and they don't understand why, and they feel worse, and but because moderation does impact our lives. And we find that when we go extremes on anything, we usually bounce right back to sometimes even worse than we were previously. So thank you for saying it. I think our listeners can appreciate how much moderation can be, and that, restricting something totally out of your diet, don't you just start to focus on it anyway?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, I have to be honest, I struggle with that too. I tend to be more type A and, have to avoid those perfectionistic tendencies that I want to have. And so, I tend to lean towards that, and I have to remind myself, okay, you ate that for lunch. It's not the end of the world. We don't, just go off the deep end the rest of the day, just get back on track. But I get it. It's hard. And, I like a very black and white plan too, but it's not like that. And one of the things that I found is helpful to myself, but also I found is helpful to other people, is to look at your eating in the context of a week, not a 24-hour period, over a week. So, when you look at it from a week perspective, that kind of gives you almost a little more leeway. It gives you more time to get the leafy green vegetables that you need, to get those omega-3s. It's not like, you have to be perfect every single day. It gives you leeway to have a little added sugar in there if you want it.
I like looking at it that way, because there's always that Saturday morning you're taking the kids and there's a parent there with all good intentions, and there's that beautiful fat donut. And you start to think, should I, shouldn't I? I'm going to, and I don't want to feel guilty for it. I just want to enjoy it, because that's what life's all about in the end. If you can really balance the goods with the bad, and you have that week, it's much easier than to say, okay, today, this morning I didn't do so good on getting any greens in for breakfast. I didn't do it at lunch. But when you think of it on a longer term process, you start to be able to give yourself a little leeway and find the happiness back instead of the anxiety. Oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. I shouldn't have done that. And that in and of itself, that stress on your body is another inflammatory issue that can come up. So let's talk about inflammation and cooling. You talked about the good fats and how that can impact the inflammatory process. Is there other things that you would recommend when, for example, you suffer with osteoarthritis osteoarthritis in your knees. And, it flares up every once in a while, but it's not enough to stop you from any activities of daily living. What would you talk to that person about in terms of their eating habits and trying to cool the inflammation down?
Well, and I love that you're asking this because people tend to say, what do I need to cut out? What do I not need to eat? And I really try to steer them back to, let's start with what you need to add to your diet. Let's start adding. And once you start adding, then you'll see a lot of times some of those less healthy things, some of those more inflammatory things, you're not consuming quite as much, or you don't really have cravings for. And there are 3 groups of foods that are across the board. I feel like everyone needs on a daily basis. And, I was just going through stacks and stacks and stacks of research when I was writing this. And, I had a pile for specific foods that had potential anti-inflammatory properties. And these 3 groups of foods just got to be almost obnoxious. And because it would, I'd be like, oh my gosh, leafy greens again, give me something new, berries again, but there's the strongest research for leafy greens, berries, and cruciferous vegetables. Leafy greens, everybody needs to try to get in a cup a day, or at least 6 cups a week. Berries, try to get them in several times a week. And then cruciferous vegetables, which I tell people they're typically the ones that smell when you're cooking them. They've got the sulfur compounds, but those sulfur compounds are actually what are which help reduce inflammation and act as antioxidants in the body. So I really encourage people to start there. And sometimes that's overwhelming. That's okay. Just try to maybe get in, 2 of those a day or 1 of those a day, and then start building from there. But those are the 3 that I just tell people. There is so much, we tend to think about what we need to cut out, but there is so much power in those 3 groups of foods and other anti-inflammatory foods, but there's so much power in those foods that can prevent inflammation or ease inflammation. And, it's important to, eat this way to reduce inflammation before that osteoarthritis kicks up. It really just needs to be all the time.
Well said. And as we start to cool some of the things that we already have, let's talk about the correlation between what you've learned as you were developing this book and the recipes that are in it between food and disease, because it's one thing to have that flare up. It's another to move into a disease state. And I like to look at disease as dis-ease. It's actually, if you split it in half, there's 2 parts to that. And in a chiropractic lifestyle, that's the way we try to look at our bodies in balance, is that they're at ease. So now we get into this chronic inflammation system, and now it is really in dis-ease. So share with me what you've learned between the food and the disease process.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people get that there are some food and health connections. There are some that are pretty obvious for people to see. You eat a lot of sodium and you see a direct correlation, or some do, in their blood pressure. You eat, X more calories than you need on an ongoing basis, you see, weight gain. It's really the not so clear ones that we're bad at noticing, and that are hard that probably don't get much press, maybe because they're not as clear. And, it really, all those little signs or those little connections between food and health really have to do with inflammation. Something is acting as an irritant. It may be excess calories. It may be excess alcohol. It may be a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It may be, a lack of antioxidants from produce. It may be artificial sweeteners or an excess of sugar, but something is acting as an irritant in the body, and it's causing just this kind of low level of irritation in the body. And I tell people, if you, back when I actually worked in an office, maybe if something happened that morning that just kind of upset you, threw you for a loop, you were just a little bit on edge. And so later that day, even though, it was fine, things are, because you're on edge, things can sometimes bother you a little bit more, where they wouldn't on a day where, something hadn't happened. That's kind of how your body is when it has kind of an irritant, or it's being irritated by something that you've eaten or not eaten in the body. You just develop this low level of inflammation, and that makes your body a little more hypersensitive to other irritants. And what I discovered is that's really kind of the progression for disease development. It's that inflammation slowly builds. So it may start out as you gain a few pounds, your blood sugar's running high. Then maybe you get diagnosed with, type 2 diabetes. All of a sudden it's progressed, and we say, we tend to look at all those steps, or we tend to not look at all those steps in between. But really, it's a slow inflammatory process that's just building until we see these overt signs and meet the criteria for type 2 diabetes, as in this example, or until we get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. But everybody has some level of low-grade inflammation in their body right now. So it's really just keeping that inflammation at bay. That's the best thing to really prevent diseases, if you do have something, it will help ease symptoms. But if you don't, prevent, those genes for autoimmune conditions from turning on, or prevent, those cell mutations, prevent that inflammation that leads to high blood pressure and then a stroke. So that was really kind of my big takeaway. It's a slow inflammatory process, and if you can stop inflammation at any point in there, that's going to reduce your disease risk.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if the listeners are really paying attention right now, they can start to slow down a lot of the things that start to creep onto us, such as obesity, that can lead to type 2 diabetes, that can then lead to hypertension, that could then put us into a whole hamster wheel of unfortunate events. And it does make sense, because you think of it just, I look at it as a garden. You plant these beautiful, wonderful seeds. They're developing well, but you don't go out and you don't water it. Well, it's not going to thrive. And then you don't go out and you don't take the weeds out. Well, it's still not going to have that same thriving ability. You need the sunlight, you need the water, you need the good nutrition of the soil, you need the fabulous air. And if we think of our bodies in that broad spectrum of what are we going to do to ensure that this body is going to be nourished well every day, exactly. It starts with what we put in our mouth, and then it goes up the chain, and we start creating a better life through just really what I would consider is to be present in the moment. What are you stuffing in your mouth when you get really stressed out? Yeah. Well, a carrot would be a much better choice. You can crunch down on it versus, oh yeah, I want those salty potato chips because I feel that comfort food moment coming on.
Yeah.
So well said.
Traditional medicine tends to wait till we see these overt signs. It tends to wait till you have that high blood pressure, till you have that blood sugar, that hemoglobin A1C that meets diagnostic criteria. Really, and that's when we tend to change eating behaviors and lifestyle behaviors. But it really starts way before then.
Yes. And really when you're young and you start to appreciate that you can transfer the goodness of greens and berries into your lifestyle without making a lot of noise about it, and that it does taste good. And you've worked on the recipes to make it taste good, because I know you have children, and there's nothing more than a critic, like a child, to say, I'm not eating that. And
definitely
those cruciferous ones that do smell when you're cooking them, I'm not eating that. Well, wait a minute. Let's just put it on the plate before you actually say you're not going to eat that. And I always am reminded by many that you can taste a lot and eat a little. Try new things. And that's what I love about your book too, is there's all sorts of things in there that I've never tried in a recipe per se, but I think it's going to be fun just to dive in and start making some interesting combinations, because life is, you make it interesting and fun and create and explore what is good for you. And sometimes you eat something and You feel absolutely fantastic. Well, you can't just go overboard on it, but you do want to be able, if you want to have your best day, for example, like I love salmon. And I know that I want my very best day to be the very best day. The night before, salmon is my choice of protein. But speaking of your very best day, we all know that if our gut health is not good, from GERD to stomach upset to constipation, there's going to be a problem. So what role does gut health play in your overall health?
Oh gosh. So those gut microbes, those good ones, when they are balanced and when we have diversity and, adequate numbers, they provide a protective lining inside the intestines. And that protective lining allows the good things that we eat. They're broken down carbohydrates, they're broken down proteins, they're broken down fats and vitamins and minerals. It allows those to be absorbed through the intestinal wall into the body, but it blocks a lot of the junk that we might eat. So those compounds, those chemicals, the colorings, things that that aren't naturally in food that we really don't need. So a healthy gut will do that. When your gut starts to take a hit and some of your microbes, good ones, your good microbes are out of balance, or you are missing certain strains, or your numbers are low, it creates gaps in that protective lining. And that allows some of the junk to seep through the intestinal wall into the body. What kind of a basic way to look at leaky gut. But so having a strong gut is so key, partly to prevent that stuff from leaking into the body, the junk, the irritants, the toxins from leaking into the body. And that's really where a lot of, disease and conditions stem from, or that's how they get initiated. And it's what causes inflammation in the body. But so keeping, the more I read about the gut, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, it controls so much. Someone described the gut on a podcast I was listening to the other day. It was talking about the gut's connection to the brain, and it described the gut microbes as like puppeteers controlling the brain. And there really is so much that the gut dictates. So, a key thing in easing inflammation, preventing inflammation, just improving overall health and maintaining it is strengthening the gut, those good gut microbes. And, there was a research study from Stanford this past summer, or this summer actually, that looked at, okay, what does the best job at doing that? They found that eating fermented foods, or foods with live active cultures on a daily basis, was one of the very best things to strengthen the gut, to build the gut back up. So eating, drinking that kombucha, eating the yogurt with the live active cultures, the cheeses with live active cultures, getting things like miso and tempeh, sauerkraut. Now you want the sauerkraut that is refrigerated, not the sauerkraut that's on the shelf.
Got it.
Yeah. So you want the live cultures, but just getting in more of those every day. Fiber is important too, but what the study showed is that getting those fermented foods and the ones with live active cultures was really key and had the quickest effect.
Those are some very simple ways that I think you can start to prioritize your gut health. And there's always hydration as well. And you just kind of listed, what do you do on a simple way to prioritize the gut health from bringing in the fermented food? How much does hydration play a role in your gut health?
I wouldn't say it has a direct role, but, anything that is a stress on the body, whether it's mentally, physically, anything that's a stress on the body generates some inflammation. So dehydration is a stress on the body. And stress and along with a bunch of food components are some things that are harmful to those gut microbes. So, I guess from a standpoint of anything that stresses the body is going to cause inflammation. Yeah. Yeah.
You have done an outstanding job at putting together not just what nutrition is, not just how inflammation can create problems in the future, but you also brought that gut health back to the importance, the real why. And I do like the analogy of the puppeteer to the brain, because you're right. If the gut is not being able to perform, whether it's been, you're on a specific drug, you've gone through chemotherapy, you've doused yourself with some alcohol or depression, all these things do play a role in our gut health. And as we start to walk through that week, as you say, we get to determine, what does that week look like? How important is the gut health? How are we restoring our balance to the synergy and energy of homeostasis, which is so very important in today's world? Carolyn, it has been an absolute pleasure to be with you today and learn more about what we can do in big and small ways, from the microcosm of our gut health to the macrocosm of keeping our stress levels down and providing for our families meals that really do heal. So we appreciate your time. I know there's so much more that we could cover, and I'm hoping that you'll return to Adjusted Reality and share more with us.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Carolyn Williams about meals that heal, the importance of knowing the science behind the foods you eat and the correlation between food and disease, how to calm inflammation, and how to help that gut health and restore its natural protective environment to help the brain do its incredible job that it's set to do. This podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, visit f4cp.org/health to get a copy of our Mind, Body, Spirit ebook, which focuses on many ways to optimize your health and the ones you love without the use of drugs or surgery. Don't forget to subscribe, share the podcast with family and friends, rate and review. If you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a doctor of chiropractic near you, visit f4cp.org/find-a-doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in again with you soon.